And on this day in 2001, October 19th, 200 Army Rangers from the 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment parachuted out of 4 C-130 aircrafts into southern Afghanistan into the airfield in Kandahar and began the longest war in our nation's history.
What republic turns into an empire, exhausts itself way too thin militarily and financially, whose society starts to decay, and then everything turns out all right?
There was a Stars and Stripes headline about a week and a half ago, and it read, "Years after they fought in Afghanistan, troops watch children deploy to the same war." That was the headline. A military independent newspaper in the United States of America. I mean, is that obscene? Is that grotesque? Of course it is. There's no precedent for it in American history. Why is that not a national scandal? Why is every polite establishment newspaper not reporting it every single day until the war ends? And I think that's the rub. To a large extent, the American people have become a bit numb to war that continues forever. They're immune, distracted. The media is misleading in many cases or misdirects them to other issues. We need to prepare ourselves for a soldier who is born after 9/11 dying in Afghanistan or some other war. That could be, I think, a point of no return for what's left of sort of a republic and its aspirations. More obscene still, I think you've seen a bipartisan enterprise of erasure of this war. And it's, certain Republicans, it's a lot of the Democrats, which some people might not assume. And even many of the veterans who go to Congress, they really haven't followed through once they have to raise all that money. And we see the absurd situation where all of the Democrats and many of the Republicans are cutting off the funds to end a war because they don't like the person ending it. And it really doesn't matter what you think about the individual person. That seems pretty obscene. But I can't help thinking through all the things I'm describing, WWSD, what would Smedley do? And I'll tell you this, he'd call bull. He's hardly a dove. This isn't some peacenik hippie who can't stand his country and wants to tear it down. I mean, a lot of people know the broad strokes of Smedley Butler, but he's a peculiar man. He's from a Quaker family and education, but he fights in 10 combat deployments, maybe more depending how you count. He wins 2 Congressional Medal of Honors. What would have maybe won a 3rd, except in his early heroics, officers couldn't win the Medal of Honor. But he'd be here, and he'd be at every other event, and he'd probably be on Amtrak down to D.C. or wherever the next trip was before he even had time to get lunch. And I'm just glad to be a small part of the urgency that this group is bringing together. The big tent aspect, how they view this issue, that it's not left-right, it's not red-blue, it's the nation, it's the republic. What kind of a country do we want to be? Do we want our children to be raised in a country where they have to see that headline, that a father and a son serve in the same war? The prediction that he made was that when money and congressional influence and a media that's supporting them works together in tandem, you have a formula for a forever war.
Every Middle Eastern intervention in my lifetime, since I was a toddler, has been a disaster and has only led to the next major intervention. So we start in 1979 with Afghanistan. And Jimmy Carter's advisors, Zbigniew Brzezinski and Walter Slocum, recommended that since the American people had the Vietnam syndrome, that was a reluctance to intervene in proxy wars overseas after the last disaster there, that maybe instead of containing communism, we could do the opposite and bait them into overexpansion. We'll give them their own Vietnam, is what they said. A horrible, no-win quagmire that destabilizes the country back home that you wish you'd never done. And maybe we can do this to the Soviet Union. And to that end, on July 3rd, 1979, Jimmy Carter signed a finding authorizing the CIA to begin backing the Afghan Mujahideen. But not only that, to embark on a joint project with the Saudis and the Pakistanis to bring Mujahideen fighters from all across the Middle East and Central Asia and even as far as the Philippines and Indonesia to come to Afghanistan to fight the holy war against the Soviet Union. To attack the United States scare us away, but to bait, to give us our own Vietnam again in Afghanistan. And bin Laden himself explained this publicly over and over again in his CNN interviews, his interviews with The Independent, and all the other newspapers in the 1990s. He explicitly said, we are trying to replicate the exact policy that you helped us do to the Soviet Union in the 1980s. And now we're going to do it to you. The Soviets had killed 1 million Afghans. This is the war that bin Laden wanted to replicate. And he didn't care how many Afghans died, as long as the American empire would be broken and would finally go home from the region at the end of the war, the way the Soviet Union had done. We went from approximately 400 members of Al-Qaeda on September 11th to thousands, tens of thousands by the end of Iraq War II. It's time to stop doing Osama bin Laden's bidding and call off this phony war on terrorism. And that brings me to the importance of bringourtroopshome.us. You probably won't be too surprised to know that I've had in my audience over the years a great many combat veterans from the terror wars who've come home and found out the truth and become my followers and in many cases my friends. And for years I have asked them to do this. For years, this was my dream come true. If Ross Perot died and left me his billions, what would I do with it? I'd have hit the road looking for Dan McKnight.
Never before has our nation had the opportunity to silently offer a collective prayer for soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who were off fighting in a war that started before they were born. War powers and the ability to wage war was a great concern to the founding fathers of our country and the framers of our Constitution. Committing the lives of United States citizens and our military to a war such a solemn power that they did not want the control in one hand or a small set of hands. They gave the power to declare war to Congress, to the people's house of the government. Congress has abdicated their constitutional duties and responsibilities regarding war. It's been 70 years since Congress declared war, which is required by the Constitution. The United States is now engaged in a 19-year perpetual and endless war. We've been there for 19 years. I want you to think about that for just a second. We have members in our communities, children that go to school with our children, kids that grew up in our neighborhood we watched out in the yard playing ball, are now fighting in a war that started before they were even born. There's no doubt we were attacked by Islamic extremists on 9/11, and our response was proper, and it was probably just. And America wanted revenge. But the mission in Afghanistan was clearly defined in a utterly meaningless authorization of use of military force. The authorization of use of military force gave the President of the United States a blank check to go anywhere, to spend any amount of money, and for any length of time to commit our military to fight anybody that he deemed had attacked us on September 11th. The authorization of use of military force did not call for anything that we're doing in Afghanistan today. It was very specific. It gave the president the authorization to use all necessary and appropriate force for those nations, organizations, or persons that he determined planned, authorized, or committed or aided the terrorist attacks on September 11th, or anybody that harbored those people. That's it. The AUMF authorized force against anybody, again, I'm going to say it again, who planned the attacks, who committed the attacks, or who aided the attacks, or who harbored those people. Well, by February of 2002, we'd accomplished that mission, 5 months after the initial invasion. Every single person who attacked us on 9/11 was dead. The only missing piece was the killing and capture of Osama bin Laden, and that was taken care of by our Navy SEALs in 2011. Senator Jim Risch, and he serves as the chairman of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. Probably the second most powerful man in foreign policy in the country, next only to President Trump. And I questioned him in an event in Idaho in 2019, in February, and he did a complete about-face on American foreign policy. 70 years of foreign policy. He did an about-face and said, Dan, I'm with you. I'm through with nation building. President Trump has campaigned and likely won the election on a promise to end the endless wars. He signed the Doha deal and promised to have the last of our troops home by Christmas. We've seen a shift in conservative Republicans who are now aligning with many of the pacifist left who oppose the neocons and the liberal warhawks who keep us in perpetual and endless war. America is repudiating the hawks like John Bolton and Liz Cheney, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry. As I look at the veterans that are here today, those of us that fought in the global war on terror, collectively, we are saying to Congress now, this is my war. I will not pass this war on to another generation, to my children, to my grandchildren. The military cannot and should not be the easy button for an out-of-control U.S. foreign policy. At this time, I'm honored to have the opportunity to pay my respect to a legend. The Marine Corps is full of icons. Major General Smedley Butler is among the Mount Rushmore of Marine icons that deserves our respect and deserves to be honored for his service in the uniform and especially for what he did after he retired.